Imagine you are standing in a cave 100,000 years ago. The air is thick with the heavy scent of damp earth and wood smoke. At your feet lies a child. She is not sleeping. She is the first piece of evidence that our species has fundamentally changed. On her chest, you have carefully placed the antlers of a red deer. You have painted her skin with crushed red ochre, the vibrant color of life. This was not a simple biological disposal. It was a rebellion against the reality of the end. For nearly all of human history, death was an unremarkable event. A heart stopped, and the body was left to the elements like any other animal. Then something shifted in the darkness of the Skhul and Qafzeh Caves. Human signal became symbolic. Welcome to the architecture of your own mind. This is Os. We often view our ancestors as primitive versions of us, but their brains were running the exact same software you use to navigate the modern world. That software has a critical, ancient bug. It is called the simulation constraint. Your brain is a world-class predictive engine. It is constantly simulating the next 5 seconds of your life to keep you alive. It can imagine a world where you are wealthy or a world where you are starving. But it cannot imagine a world where you do not exist. To visualize non-existence, your brain still requires an observer. You are still there, in the back of your mind, watching the void. This isn't just a quirk of psychology. It is a physical limitation of your neural hardware. For the people living in these caves, this created a massive cognitive crisis. The body of a loved one was rotting before their eyes. Yet, that person was still present. They were still active and vital inside the survivor's memories. They appeared in dreams with haunting clarity. To an ancient mind, a dream was not a hallucination or a trick of the brain. It was a literal visitation. The dead were still speaking, still walking, and still demanding a place in the tribe. This is the persistent presence. It is the moment the internal simulation of a person becomes more real than their physical corpse. Rituals were the first patches for this software error. We didn't bury people to hide them from predators. We buried them to give the persistent self a home. We were trying to reconcile the rotting flesh with the living ghost. In the Skhul Cave, archaeologists found a man buried with a wild boar's jawbone. It was not a piece of trash. It was a survival kit. It was equipment for a journey that the human brain insisted was still happening. Then there is the red ochre. This mineral pigment is found at the oldest confirmed burial sites on the planet. They were painting the dead in the colors of the living. They were using art to override the pale clinical reality of death. This is the cognitive leap. It is the point where we stopped being biological machines and started being architects of the afterlife. You are still living inside this architecture. When you lose someone today, the ancient code takes over your nervous system. You feel their presence in an empty room. Find yourself talking to a photograph as if it can hear your voice. Your modern hardware is still struggling with the same simulation error. We are all trapped by the persistence of the self. This trap is the foundation of every culture on Earth. It drives us to build cathedrals, write books, and seek digital immortality. We are all trying to leave a mark in the red ochre. We are trying to stay visible in a world that eventually turns the lights off. But what if this isn't actually a human achievement? What if we aren't the sole authors of this death operating system? In 2023, a discovery in South Africa's Rising Star Cave sent shockwaves through the scientific community. A small-brained species called Homo naledi was found in the depths of an inaccessible chamber. The claims were staggering. Some scientists believe these creatures were burying their dead nearly 300,000 years ago. This predates our intelligence by an eternity. If they are right, our unique human soul is actually a primate instinct. It would mean that mourning is a biological reflex, not a thought. But a war is happening in the peer reviews. Most of the scientific community has rejected the burial theory as inadequate. They suggest the bones may have just washed into the cave naturally. They argue we are seeing patterns where none exist. This is the escalation of the human story. Our own desire for meaning is so strong that it blinds us to the data. We want the past to be poetic. We want our ancestors to be empathetic because it makes us feel better about our own mortality. We see this same bias in the famous flower burial of Shanidar Cave. For decades, it was the ultimate proof of Neanderthal love. A body was found surrounded by ancient pollen. It looked like a final gift of spring for a fallen comrade. But the 2023 high-resolution data tells a different story. The flowers weren't placed there by grieving hands. They were the work of something much smaller and far more indifferent. The pollen was deposited by burrowing bees. The most romantic story in archaeology was actually an accident of nature. This is the meaning mirage. We project our modern anxieties onto the ancient dust. We're so afraid of the void that we invent stories to fill it. Even the scientists are running the ancient code. We see a ritual where there is only biology. We see a soul where there is only a software glitch. But the glitch is powerful enough to build civilizations, and it is currently preparing you for the most dangerous realization of all. If the flowers were a lie, what does that say about your own grief? What does it say about the monuments we build for ourselves today? We are still placing red ochre on the dead. We are just using digital tools now. But the hardware is starting to fail. The next discovery is about to change everything we think we know about being human. The signal is fading. In the silence of the cave, something else is starting to speak, and it isn't human. Deep in the rising star cave of South Africa, the floor is littered with fragments of something that shouldn't exist. In 2023, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger made a claim that sent a shockwave through the scientific community. He suggested that a small-brained species called Homo naledi was burying its dead 240,000 years ago. These creatures had brains the size of an orange, roughly 450 cc. This predates our own species by hundreds of thousands of years. If Berger is right, burial is not a human trait. It is a primate trait that predates modern intelligence. But the scientific community has fought back. By 2024 and 2025, peer reviews reached a different, more haunting conclusion. The evidence for intentional burial was deemed inadequate. Geologists suggest the bones may have simply washed into those deep chambers naturally over millennia. We are seeing a ritual because we desperately want to see one. This is the first layer of the meaning mirage. We are ancient software trying to find a reason for the silence of the grave. This same desperation distorted our view of the Neanderthals for over half a century. You have likely heard of the famous Shanidar for burial in Iraq. For decades, it was the flower burial. A Neanderthal surrounded by ancient pollen, supposedly laid to rest 75,000 years ago on a bed of wild blooms. It was the smoking gun for Neanderthal empathy and spirituality. It made them feel like us. But in 2023, high-resolution studies shattered that story. The pollen wasn't a tribute from a grieving family. It was deposited by Lithargus, a species of burrowing bees that frequent the cave. The flowers were just the byproduct of insect biology. Even the most objective scientists are susceptible to the same death-meaning software as our ancestors. We want the flowers to be there because the alternative is too cold to handle. The alternative is that the body is just a biological disposal event. To understand why we fall for these mirages, we have to look at the brain's hardware. Neuroscientists have identified a fundamental simulation constraint in our neural architecture. Your brain is a world-building machine, which is physically impossible for you to imagine non-existence. To imagine nothingness, you still need a self to stand in the dark and observe it. You cannot conceive of a world where you are not the observer. For an ancient human, a dead relative wasn't truly gone. It still appeared in dreams, which to the ancient mind were indistinguishable from reality. Their voice remained stored in the survivor memory, playing back in times of intense stress. This created profound cognitive dissonance. The body is rotting on the floor, but the person is still speaking inside your head. Rituals were likely the first patches to fix this software error. Downed. We started burying things with the dead to reconcile the two realities. Look at the Skhul and Qafzeh caves in Israel. These are the oldest confirmed intentional burials dating back nearly 120,000 years. In Skhul 5, a body was found with a wild boar jawbone. In Qafzeh 11, a child was found with red deer antlers placed directly on their chest. We see the use of red ochre, mineral pigments used to paint the dead or soil. This was the moment the body became a symbol. This was the cognitive leap. Recent findings at Constraint Cave suggest this wasn't just a sapiens invention. As far back as 130,000 years ago, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens may have shared this culture of death. They were both running the same glitchy software. We're both trying to bridge the gap between the rotting flesh and the persistent ghost. But as we look at these ancient caves, we are actually looking at ourselves. We are still trapped in the same simulation. The hardware of our species has changed, but the death operating system is the same. Today, we don't use boar jaws or deer antlers. We use digital legacies, polished tombstones, and social media archives. We are still placing red ochre on ourselves, trying to stay visible. It is a desperate attempt to stay relevant in a world that eventually turns the lights off. We call it culture. We call it legacy. We call it achievement. But psychologists have a different name for it. They call it terror management. Your entire life, from your career to your beliefs, is a death avoidance project. You are managing a terror that you don't even realize you have. The mirror is finally starting to crack. Now, in the late 20th century, psychologists uncovered a reality hidden inside your daily routines. They realized the human brain is a survival machine that possesses the unique ability to contemplate its own end. This is the ultimate evolutionary paradox. Nature gave you the hardware to plan for the future, but that same hardware forced you to realize you eventually don't have one. To prevent you from descending into a paralyzing panic, your mind built a sophisticated biological firewall.
Ow.
This internal barrier is what science calls terror management theory. It suggests that everything you value is actually a buffer against the abyss. Your career, your belief systems, and even your favorite sports team are not just hobbies. They are cultural worldviews that offer you the promise of symbolic immortality. If you belong to something larger than yourself, a piece of you remains active when the biological machine stops. You are essentially placing digital antlers on your own chest. Your polished LinkedIn profile and your verified social media badges are simply the modern versions of red ochre. This hidden system fundamentally dictates how we treat the people around us. Research shows that when humans are subtly reminded of their mortality, they become fiercely defensive of their tribe. You become more patriotic, more religious, and far more hostile toward anyone who challenges your specific worldview. If your worldview keeps your death anxiety at bay, then a threat to that worldview is a threat to your survival. This is why internet arguments feel like life's or death struggles. But here's where the mirror begins to crack even further. Between 2022 and 2025, the scientific community hit a massive wall regarding this theory. Large-scale replication attempts have shown that the effects of terror management might be weaker and more complex than we first imagined. It turns out human culture might be something far more significant than just a primitive panic response. We aren't just running away from the dark of the cave. We are also building something intentional in the light. Yet the death operating system still hums quietly in our background code. Think about your long-term retirement fund. You are saving resources for a version of yourself that your brain knows will eventually cease to exist. It is the same logic that once drove the architects of the Great Pyramids. We are obsessed with remaining visible in a universe that eventually turns the lights out. Look closely at how you spend your waking hours. You work for a promotion, build a brand, and strive for a legacy. You are trying to leave a permanent footprint in a vast stadium of blowing sand. Ancient humans used animal horns and mineral pigments to signal that a single life mattered. We use data, concrete, and followers. The tools have changed, but the software remains identical. You are an ancient primate running an immortality program on 21st century hardware. You feel constant pressure to be someone because your brain equates being forgotten with being dead, but once you see the code, you cannot unsee it. You realize your anxiety about making it is just a survival mechanism firing in the wrong environment. You aren't failing at the modern game of life. You are simply succeeding at being a self-aware animal. The red ochre has never truly washed off our skin. We are still just children in a dark cave, painting our names on the wall before the sun goes down. This is the hidden architecture of your ambition. It is the silent engine behind every skyscraper and every viral social media post. This realization is not meant to be depressing. It is meant to be the ultimate liberation. When you understand why you are running, you can finally decide where you actually want to go. Consider the flower burial of Shanidar IV. For decades, we chose to see empathy in that prehistoric pollen. We desperately wanted to believe those Neanderthals mourned with the same complexity that we do today. But the 2023 debunking showed us that it was likely just the work of burrowing bees. We projected our search for meaning onto the dirt of an ancient grave. This is the meaning-seeking software in active operation. We see patterns of purpose where there are only the raw facts of biology. We do the same thing with our own lives every single morning. You narrate your experiences to make them feel like a story that will never truly end. You are the protagonist of a movie that you hope has a spectacular sequel, but the hardware eventually fails every time. The simulation constraint makes it impossible to imagine your own non-existence. Your brain literally cannot process a world where it is not the central observer. This is why you feel eternal, even when every piece of data suggests the opposite. It is a beautiful, terrifying glitch in the human machine. It is the source of all our art, our wars, and our progress. We are the only animals that know the final ending of our own story, and so we spend every waking moment trying to rewrite the script before the credits roll. You see it now, don't you? The verified checkmark is just a red ochre pigment for the digital age. The corporate ladder is just a staircase into the afterlife of human memory. We are all still standing in the Skhul and Qafzeh caves. We are simply using much better lighting. The hardware of our species has changed, but the death operating system remains unchanged. What will you do with this knowledge now that you see the machine? Will you keep feeding the engine of legacy, or will you step out of the simulation? The choice is the only thing that truly belongs to you. If you want to see the other hidden architectures we live in, subscribe to OS. We are uncovering the blueprints of the human experience, one ritual at a time. Click the next video to see how your brain's ancient code is still deciding what you eat. You'll be deciding it awake.